I went on a solo hiking trip in Vermont last fall. I had been planning it for months. I was tired of the city, tired of screens and phones and constant noise. I needed to disconnect for a few days. I mapped out a loop that would take me about 4 days, starting at a state trail and winding through a section of forest that wasn't too popular. Nothing extreme, just a chance to walk, think, and camp out under the trees. The first day went as planned. I started early, parked at the trailhead, and hiked deep into the woods. The air smelled like pine and cold dirt. The leaves were just starting to turn, and the path was quiet. No other hikers in sight. I liked it that way. I had my tent, food, water filter, and a small stove. Everything I needed was on my back. I didn't bring a GPS, just a paper map and compass. Old school. By the second day, the weather started to turn. The sky grew darker than it should have for mid-afternoon. I kept walking, hoping to beat the rain. Around 5 p.m., the wind picked up. The trees started to sway. I pulled on my rain jacket and looked for a place to camp for the night. That's when I saw it. Just off the trail, half hidden behind a patch of thick fir trees, was a cabin. I almost missed it. It was small, maybe 12 by 12 feet, with gray wood siding and a metal roof that looked rusted around the edges. One small window in the front and a short porch with a single step. It looked abandoned. There was no vehicle, no path leading to it, no lights. I stepped closer just to check it out. The door wasn't locked. It creaked open with one gentle push. Inside, it smelled like old dust and damp wood. There was a cot against one wall, a wood stove in the corner, and a little table with 2 chairs. A few old cans sat on a shelf. Someone had left behind a box of matches, a rusted kettle, and a rolled-up sleeping bag. It looked like nobody had been there in a long time, but it wasn't falling apart. Just unused. I figured it was some kind of old logger's cabin. Maybe hunters used it once in a while. Either way, the storm was rolling in fast, and I didn't want to be stuck outside in it. I left a note on the table just in case the owner came back that night. Sorry, bad weather. Just staying one night. Leaving in the morning. I started a small fire in the stove using the leftover wood and matches. The warmth filled the room quickly. I ate a protein bar and read a few pages of the paperback I brought. Rain started around 9 p.m., loud against the roof, steady and cold. I curled up on the cot in my sleeping bag and felt safe, dry, and lucky. Around midnight, I woke up. I didn't know why at first. There wasn't any loud noise, no bang or shout, just a sense of something different. I blinked a few times and sat up. That's when I heard it. A low engine sound, not close, but coming toward the cabin. Then the crunch of tires over gravel or leaves. A vehicle, out here. I got up slowly and moved toward the front window. I stayed low. Through the gaps in the trees, I saw headlights moving between the trunks. A second later, a pickup truck pulled up and stopped maybe 30 feet from the cabin. 2 men got out. They each had flashlights. One wore a cap and a heavy coat. The other had a thick beard and a long black jacket. They didn't look like park rangers or hikers. They looked rough. Their lights scanned the cabin and the woods around it. I dropped below the window. My heart was pounding. I didn't know who they were or why they were here. Maybe they used this place regularly. Maybe I'd walked into someone's business without knowing it. I crawled back toward the corner behind the stove and stayed there in the dark. The front door creaked open. They didn't knock. They didn't say anything. They just walked in like they owned the place. One of them walked to the center of the room and looked around. I saw his legs from under the table. He said, "Thought he'd be here." The other one replied, "Car's not outside. Maybe tomorrow night." Their voices were low, calm, like this was normal. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. They sat at the table. One of them opened a bag and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. He laid it on the table. I couldn't see everything, but I caught a glimpse. It was a handgun. He started cleaning it, slow and methodical, while the other one leaned back and pulled out a cigarette. They talked about a guy. No names, just he. From what I could catch, they were waiting for someone. They expected him to show up at some point that night or the next. They didn't seem angry or nervous, just patient, like this was a routine. The man with the gun finished cleaning it, wiped it with a cloth, and tucked it back into the bag. They stayed for nearly an hour. I didn't move once. My legs were cramping, and the cold from the floor was creeping into my back. But I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. They never looked in my direction. I don't think they knew I was there. Eventually, one of them said, "Let's head back. If he shows tomorrow, we'll be here." They got up. One took the gun bag. The other finished his cigarette and crushed it on the floor. Then they walked out. The headlights flashed against the trees, and the truck backed out the way it came. I waited. A long time, maybe another 2 hours. I kept telling myself they might come back, or maybe one stayed behind, or maybe they'd forgotten something. I didn't want to take the risk. But finally, when I couldn't take the fear anymore, I stood up. I didn't grab my backpack. I didn't take food or water. I had my coat, a headlamp, and my compass. That was it. I slipped out the door and into the woods, sticking to the shadows. I didn't follow the trail. I moved straight through the trees, careful to avoid making noise. I walked fast, then faster, then ran. I didn't stop until the sky started turning light gray. By the time I found the main trail again, I was shaking. My hands were numb, and my breath felt sharp in my chest. But I kept walking. Around mid-morning, I reached the ranger station at the edge of the park. I told them what happened. I didn't leave anything out. The ranger I spoke to was older, maybe late 50s. He listened carefully, asked where the cabin was, then nodded slowly. He said it matched the location of a logging shack that wasn't officially mapped anymore. He told me that some hunters used to stay there, and occasionally hikers stumbled on it. Then he said something that stuck with me. He said there had been rumors. People talked. There were stories, nothing the police could follow up on, but stories about the cabin being used for off-the-books things. Drug drops, meetings, things passed hand to hand. Nothing confirmed, just whispers. He told me I was lucky, said I'd probably just scared off 2 guys expecting a different visitor. He told me I should avoid cabins I don't know, that even abandoned ones sometimes have owners, just not the kind who leave keys under flower pots. I never got my backpack back. I didn't care. The scariest part of that night wasn't the gun. It wasn't the voices. It wasn't even the moment the door creaked open. It was the calmness, the quiet way they talked, the way they sat down like it was just another night, like this wasn't the first time they'd done it, like they'd be back. I still go hiking. I still love the woods, but I stay on marked trails now. I bring a GPS. I never spend the night in places I don't know. I never assume a quiet place is safe just because it looks empty. I know better now. I picked the wrong place at the wrong time, and I still think about what might have happened if I'd moved, coughed, stepped wrong, if they'd seen the flicker of my eyes in the dark. I don't think they would have asked questions, and I don't think they would have let me leave. A couple weeks ago, I was hiking solo through grassland. Not just any grassland. This was deep country, several hours' drive from any town, let alone a city. Somewhere on the border between prairie and scrubland, where the terrain rolls like frozen waves and the sky feels too wide for comfort. It's the kind of place that makes you feel like a dot on a canvas someone forgot to finish painting. There are no houses out there, no power lines, no fences, just empty space, wind, and the occasional distant shape of something moving across the hills. I planned the hike for months. The route followed a fated service trail that cut through a protected area, a national grassland zone that's rarely trafficked. There are sections without any marked trail, but the GPS points were well known online among those who hike this kind of open, wild land. I packed everything carefully: water, food, first aid, GPS, bear spray. Even though it was bison country, tarp, bivy sack, and a basic survival kit. Enough for 3 days out and back with room to spare. No real tree cover, no running water past the first 10 miles. Just rolling land and animal trails. I started early on day 1, a little before sunrise. The air was still almost cold. There were birds overhead and long shadows across the ground. The grass was high in places, thigh-high, and stiff. In others, it was cropped short by the wind and grazing. The colors were muted gold and green and tan, the kind of palette that doesn't change much even as the sun moves overhead. The first few hours were peaceful. I didn't see another human. I wasn't expecting to. Most people avoid this kind of country. It's too open, too dry, too full of space where you're just left with your own thoughts. There was no cell service, and I didn't mind. That was part of the draw. Solitude, simplicity. By midday, the wind picked up. That's when the planes start talking. It's not like wind in a forest. It doesn't rustle. It hisses and groans and rolls across the land like a body, comes from nowhere and never stops, presses against your legs when you walk. It makes it hard to hear yourself think. I kept moving. By late afternoon, I saw my first bison in the distance. A dark, lumpy silhouette just over a ridge to the north, a few hundred yards out. He was alone, probably a bull, big. You don't get a sense of their size from pictures. In person, they don't look like anything else alive today. Just muscle and bone and a hide that looks too thick to be real. He didn't move much, just turned slowly to look at me as I passed along a low rise. I gave him space. That's always the rule. Don't get close. Don't surprise them. Don't stare too long. They're used to being left alone, and they don't like when that changes. The campsite I picked was a shallow depression behind a grass-covered ridge. It wasn't much, but it blocked the wind a little. I staked the tarp low, just enough room to crawl under. Ate dinner cold to avoid a fire. Watched the sun sink until the sky went from yellow to pink to black. Then I lay back, zipped into my bivy sack, and stared up at the stars. Out there, stars don't blink. They shine hard. There's nothing between them and you. No light pollution, no city glow, just raw sky. It's beautiful, but it also makes you feel smaller than you ever have. There's no comfort in it, just awareness, like the world is telling you exactly how meaningless you are out here. I slept in short bursts. Wind woke me a few times. So did rustling nearby, probably deer or rodents. Nothing close, no sounds of hooves pounding, no warning signs. The next morning, I packed early. My goal was to loop southeast, pass by a dry creek bed that still had a few pools of standing water, and make it back to the first leg of the trail. The air was cooler that morning, heavier. I don't know if it was the barometric pressure or just my gut, but something felt off. I double-checked my gear before I moved, tightened my pack, secured everything, looked out over the ridge before climbing it. That's when I saw him again. Same bull, or at least one just like him, bigger than I remembered. Maybe a quarter-mile away, across the lowland, grazing slowly. His head swung side to side like a pendulum. Massive shoulders, hunched back, that strange, shaggy coat around the neck that makes them look prehistoric. He was heading in a different direction than me, so I relaxed. Still kept an eye on him as I moved, but didn't feel nervous. A couple hours later, the land flattened again. I followed what looked like an old migration path, just a faint depression in the grass, lined with hoof prints and dung. It was the only walkable line through the tall stuff. I moved quick through that section, checking GPS every so often, drinking in short sips. No trees, no cover, just the kind of exposed emptiness that makes your back itch. Then I crested another rise, and he was there, closer this time, maybe 100 feet ahead, just standing at the top of the next hill, facing me. His body blocked out part of the sky. He didn't move, not even a twitch, just stared. His eyes locked onto me like I'd stepped into something I wasn't supposed to see. Everything stopped. My breath, my feet, the wind even seemed to pause. I knew what to do. I'd read the guidelines. I had training. You keep your distance. Don't turn and run. Don't provoke. Don't make sudden movements. But the thing is, it's different when you're alone. When there's no ranger, no car, no one coming if you screw it up. All that preparation feels thin. I raised my arms a little, trying to look bigger. My heart was hammering so hard I thought he could hear it. I stood still, watched his hooves shift slightly in the grass. Dust puffed under him. His tail flicked once. Then, without any warning, he dropped his head and took 2 hard steps toward me. That's when everything in me froze. I wanted to move. I wanted to run. Every instinct screamed to get away. But I stayed, rooted, legs like concrete. The bison took another step, then another. He was walking now, not charging, not running, but not slow either. He closed the gap to 60 feet. 50. I felt my hands go numb. My mouth opened. I forced noise out, strong, firm, everything I had. I didn't know what I was saying, just a wave of sound. Loud, forceful, not panic, just raw survival energy, pushed out through my chest like I could will him to stop. And he did. 15 yards out, he stopped. Head still down, shoulders heaving, dust rising around his front legs. He was close enough I could see the cords of muscle rippling under his hide. Close enough to smell the sharp, earthy stink of sweat and dust and raw animal. For a long second, neither of us moved. Then he snorted, loud, a puff of steam in the morning air, turned slightly, walked away, just like that, slow, deliberate, back across the rise until he was just a silhouette again, then gone. I couldn't move for another full minute. My legs didn't work. My pack felt like it weighed 100 pounds. My whole body was shaking. I'd never felt that kind of fear before, not even close. It was the fear of knowing that nothing you had with you could stop what almost happened. That you were seconds from being nothing but meat under a 2,000-pound animal with no interest in mercy. Eventually, I moved, slowly, carefully, kept walking not in his direction. Circled wide, cutting south until I rejoined a dry wash. No other bison that day, no more encounters, but the silence after that moment wasn't peaceful. It was hollow. I made it back to my car the next evening, legs burning, lips cracked, covered in dust. When I sat down in the driver's seat, I just sat there for a long time. Didn't start the engine, didn't reach for my phone. Just sat and looked out over the empty grassland stretching off into the horizon, thinking about how close I came to not walking back. Hiking alone gives you clarity. That's part of the appeal. But there's a sharp edge to that clarity when something goes wrong. That day, I realized how truly alone I was out there. No fences, no phones, no help. Just me and whatever the land decided to put in front of me. And it didn't care how careful I was. Since then, I still hike. I still head out into the wild, into the places with no voices and no maps. But I look differently now. I move differently. I don't take the silence for granted. I don't assume the distance means safety. And every time I see a shape on the horizon that might be more than rock or shadow, I remember what it felt like to stare into those dark, steady eyes, knowing I had nothing but my voice to hold him back. It worked that time, but I know deep down it doesn't always. And out there are no second chances. We started the hike just after sunrise. Northern Ontario was already quiet by nature, but that morning felt heavier than usual. The sky had that washed-out pale blue of early summer mornings, and a line of thick clouds sat low in the distance like they were waiting for something to happen. My partner and I had planned this for weeks. The old mining road we were using was barely a road anymore. Just a twisted corridor of gravel, overgrowth, and decades of neglect. Nature had been taking it back 1 inch at a time. Both of us carried about 27 pounds in our packs: food, water, 2-person tent, filter, sleeping bags, clothes, cooking gear, GPS, emergency supplies. The essentials. The weight wasn't crushing, but it made every movement more deliberate. Every time we had to duck under or climb over a fallen tree, we felt it. And there were a lot of them. Whole sections of the trail looked like they'd been bombed. Huge spruce and birch trunks snapped or uprooted by wind, lying in chaotic angles. We had to crawl in some areas, or take wide detours through the undergrowth just to avoid slipping on decaying bark. The mining road had once led to some kind of exploratory site, maybe copper or nickel. We weren't sure and we didn't care much. What drew us was the topographic map and a faint glimmer of open space we'd spotted on satellite imagery. A small lake to the south of the trail, barely visible through the dense cover. It had a small beach, or what looked like one, with a nice clearing just behind it. No signs of cabins, no old fire rings. It seemed untouched. That's what drew us. After nearly 3 hours of slow hiking and crawling over wreckage, we reached the point where the road curved east, and we needed to cut south into the forest. There was no trail, no signage, nothing but dense boreal growth. It was like staring into a sea of green and shadow. Most people wouldn't go in. We did. Anyone who's been deep in boreal forest knows the terrain doesn't forgive. It's not like the neatly spaced trees you see in parks. It's cluttered and uneven. Moss blankets the floor, but beneath it is everything from ankle-breaking roots to sinkholes. Spruce and jack pine grow so close together you often can't swing your arms without hitting needles. The forest is also deceptively loud. Branches cracking underfoot, insects humming, birds flitting overhead, and yet somehow it still feels silent. I led the first half of the bushwhack. My partner followed close behind. We moved slow, cutting with a machete in spots, pushing branches aside in others. Every few minutes we stopped to check the GPS and make sure we were heading roughly south. Our destination was just under a mile away, but it might as well have been 5. Even a single step took effort. The ground rose and fell without warning, hidden beneath green carpets. In places it was soggy, in others dry and cracked, and always there were conifers, thick ones. Then came the moment I'll never forget. We were about 30 minutes into the off-trail hike. I stepped to avoid a dense knot of black spruce and moved slightly to the right, passing within a couple of feet of a conifer trunk. One of the older ones, thick and gnarled with age. I placed my right foot down and it just disappeared. Not the shoe. My whole leg, up to mid-thigh, vanished into the earth. I didn't fall. Reflex took over. My left leg locked, and I threw my upper body back hard, trying not to go in further. Somehow I managed to stay balanced and yank myself back out. Heart hammering, I dropped to my knees and stared. There was no visible hole. The surface was covered in brown pine needles and broken branches. It looked solid, but I had just sunk straight into it like it was paper. I picked up a thick dead branch and started poking around the area. The stick slid in without resistance. A few inches to the left, same thing. A little further out, still soft. Then to the right, hard ground again. It wasn't just one hole. It was a collapse. Maybe an old animal den. Maybe rot. Maybe something else. It was hard to tell. The whole thing was probably 3 feet wide and completely hidden under forest debris. I got back up slowly and dusted myself off. My leg was scraped but not bleeding. But it wasn't the pain that got me. It was the realization. How many of these holes were there? We tested a few more nearby spots with branches. Found 2 more shallow collapses within a few yards, one beside another conifer trunk, and one near a rotting stump. None as deep as the first, but enough to twist an ankle, break a leg. Worse, if the hole was deep enough, we might never get out on our own. The earth here was unreliable, soft in ways it shouldn't be. We didn't speak, didn't need to. We just started keeping a wide berth from any conifer trunks. If we had to walk through open ground, we tested each step. We poked, we prodded. We moved like people sneaking across thin ice. The forest didn't change. Still dense, still wet in places, still loud with mosquitoes and wind and birds we couldn't see. But now everything felt heavier. Every shadow under a tree could be a hole. Every time we heard something shift beneath us, a squish or a creak, we paused and waited, just to make sure the earth wouldn't give. Eventually, we made it. The forest opened slightly, and we hit the edge of the lake. It wasn't large, maybe a few hundred meters across, but it was pristine. The water was perfectly still. You could see the sky reflected in it, clouds, patches of blue. And there was the beach, not sand exactly, more like small rocks and hard-packed earth, but it was open, and the trees backed off just enough to let light in. It felt like another world. We dropped our packs and stood for a long time just looking, breathing. My shirt was soaked through. My hands were scratched from pushing brush aside. My boots were caked with black mud and moss, but it was worth it. We spent the night there, set up the tent on a patch of dry ground near the beach, ate dehydrated meals warmed on the stove, filtered lake water and listened to the wind in the trees. Saw no signs of people.
No boats, no trash.
Nothing. It was untouched wilderness. But even as I lay in the tent that night, I kept thinking about the hole. Not just that one, but the idea of them. The forest had hidden them so well. They could be anywhere. If I'd fallen in all the way, if I'd hit my head or broken something, my partner wouldn't have been able to pull me out easily. No signal, no roads nearby. And going back through that forest with one person injured? Nearly impossible. The hike back the next morning was just as slow, just as cautious. We followed the same GPS track out. Same obstacles. Same fallen trees. My body ached from the previous day, and the pack felt heavier, even though it wasn't. We didn't talk much, just moved. When we finally broke out onto the old mining road again, there was this strange sense of relief. Not like we were out of the woods completely, but at least we were on ground that didn't shift under our feet. We made it back to the car late that afternoon. Shoes full of debris, clothes torn, tired. I think about that trip a lot. It was beautiful, remote, the kind of silence you don't get near towns or cities. The lake felt like a secret place, but I also think about how fast things can go bad in a place like that. All it takes is one wrong step. You prepare for a lot on hikes like that: weather, animals, navigation problems. But not that. Not hidden sinkholes under a layer of needles. And the thing is, there was no sign, no warning, just a patch of forest floor like any other, and then it wasn't. We were lucky. We made it out. That hike is one of my favorite memories. But it's also a reminder. Out there, the land doesn't care who you are or how careful you think you're being. It hides things. Old things, dangerous things. You learn quick that the boreal forest doesn't give second chances. And I never step too close to conifer trunks anymore. I don't do night hikes, at least not anymore. This was a few years ago, and if I'm being honest, I wasn't thinking straight. I had just moved to a new state, still in that phase where you're trying to prove something to yourself more than anyone else. I'd been hiking for a while, mostly solo, and I thought I was more experienced than I actually was. I'd done long trails. I'd bushwhacked a bit, carried heavy packs, slept in the rain. I thought that gave me some kind of right to take risks. The stupid kind. That kind of confidence has teeth, and it bites hard when it wants to. The hike was supposed to be a half-day loop in the mountains. The kind that zigzags up for a few miles and drops back down the other side. Beautiful country, thick forest, lots of deer, open ridges. But that area also had wild boars. Bears too, though they weren't seen as often. Locals said they kept to the higher valleys. It was hunting country in the fall, but this was early summer. Quiet. I'd seen scat before. Prints. A few trees marked by tusks or claws. Never a live animal. That day I got a late start. Way too late. I had planned to be on the trail by noon. Instead, I left the trailhead at 4:15 p.m. I knew the sun wouldn't stay up forever, but I figured I'd move fast. I was feeling good. Muscles were fresh, gear was light. I wasn't planning to camp. Just a loop. 5 hours, maybe 6 tops. The sun went down around 8 o'clock. I was still deep in the forest by then. By 8:30, it was properly dark. Not twilight, not dusky. Pitch black under the canopy. The kind of dark where your eyes adjust and then readjust again and still you don't see much. I had a headlamp, thankfully. I'm not that dumb. But even with the beam on full power, I could only see about 20 feet ahead of me. Everything outside that narrow cone felt alive. Not in the comforting way forests do in the day, but in the way that makes your brain start to hunt for movement that isn't there. The sounds change at night. In daylight, birds chatter. Wind moves through the leaves. Bugs buzz and squirrels dart. But at night, it goes still. Like something bigger has stepped into the room and everything smaller knows to shut up. I was moving fast. Not quite running, but close. It's hard to run on rocky trail without eating it. I'd done that before. Caught a root wrong, split open my palm, limped for days. I didn't want to do that again, so I kept my steps high, fast, precise. My pack thumped against my back. Sweat ran cold down my spine. Then I heard it. The first sound was soft. A rustle. Could have been anything. A rabbit.
A wind gust.
But it wasn't just that. It was where it came from, off to my right. Downhill. In the trees. Close. And it didn't stop. There was a long pause, maybe 5 or 6 seconds, and then more rustling. Louder. Heavier. Measured. Not wind. Not a bird, definitely not a squirrel. Something big was moving through the undergrowth, low to the ground, pacing the slope beside me. Couldn't see it. My headlamp bounced light across a few trunks and ferns, but the trail dipped right then, and the slope beside me steepened down into thick brush. But I could hear it, leaves shifting, small branches cracking, dirt being pushed aside. It wasn't charging. It was moving in wide, careful arcs, tracking. My stomach flipped so hard it hurt. I froze in place, knees locked, heart thudding so fast it felt like it was skipping. My ears were ringing from the pressure. I stood there, bent slightly forward from the momentum of walking fast, now paralyzed with my foot half hovering in the air. I didn't breathe, not for a full 5 seconds. Then I slowly turned to face the noise, swinging my headlamp in that direction. The beam lit up trees and bushes, sharp-edged and yellow, but nothing moved. Couldn't see it. I could just hear it, more movement now. Still slow, still circling. I wasn't armed. No bear spray, no knife. Just a hiking pole and a cheap whistle clipped to my pack strap. I thought briefly about blowing it, but the idea of making noise felt wrong. Like if I broke the tension, it would snap into something worse. So I started walking again. Fast. Not careless, but not quiet either. I kept my steps hard. Let the sound of my movement carry. I figured maybe whatever it was would hear me and back off. Didn't. I heard it again after maybe 20 more steps. Still off to my right. Closer now. Uphill. Like it had moved ahead while I stood frozen. And now it was pacing me from the front. I swung the headlamp again. Same result. Brush. Trees. Nothing visible. But the sound was there. Heavy. Deliberate. Not crashing through like a bear. Not skittering like a boar. Just steady. I felt the sweat roll down my legs. My thighs burned. My back ached from how tightly I was holding myself. Even my jaw hurt from clenching. It's hard to explain how long a minute can feel in a situation like that. I think in total it tracked me for maybe 45 seconds. Maybe a minute, tops. But time doesn't move right when your brain is screaming at you to run and your body is locked in place. Felt like a full hour. I imagined its size, its shape, its teeth. A bear? But they don't usually stalk people. A boar? Maybe, but they move different, louder, clumsier. And if it was a person, some sick freak out in the woods, that was worse. Eventually, the sounds stopped. Just like that. One moment, branches shifting, leaves parting. The next, nothing. Like a door had shut on the whole scene. I didn't stop. Couldn't. I just kept moving. My light flicked across the trail. My steps were harder now, more rushed, but I didn't dare run. I imagined falling, imagined lying there with something standing over me, imagined jaws closing around my ankle or worse, hands. I made it to the trailhead at 9:42 p.m. I remember the exact time because I checked my phone 3 times in a row just to make sure it was real. My car was the only one there. The little gravel lot was empty, surrounded by trees that now looked like walls. I got in, locked the doors, turned on the engine, and just sat there with the headlights pointed into nothing. My heart didn't slow for another 15 minutes. Back at home, I didn't sleep. Not that night. I lay in bed with the covers up to my chin, windows locked, blinds closed, ears twitching at every floor creak and distant bark. I didn't even tell anyone about it for weeks. When I did, I made it sound funny. Like, haha, almost shit myself in the woods, you know how it goes. But I stopped doing night hikes. And that place, I never went back. I still hike. I still go alone. But now I start early. I check my pack 3 times. I carry bear spray, a better light, a knife even if I never use it. I pay attention to every print in the dirt, every broken branch, every odd smell. Because the thing I learned out there, that thing that stayed with me, is that the woods aren't empty after dark. They aren't haunted. They aren't cursed. They're just wild. And out there, alone in the dark, sometimes something is watching. Not with hate, not with hunger, just watching. And sometimes that's enough to break you. I was lucky. Whatever it was that night, animal, person, both, neither, it let me go. But I'll never forget how it felt to be known, to be marked, to have something step just close enough to touch and then decide not to. Not this time. I hiked alone that day. I had flown to the big island of Hawaii for some time off. Not the tourist-heavy kind, though. I wasn't staying at a resort or taking tours. I rented a small off-grid cabin, the kind with solar panels that only worked when the sun did, and no cell signal for miles. That was the point. I wanted to be cut off. It had been a rough few months back home. Work stress, a relationship ending in that slow, silent kind of way. I wanted the kind of quiet you only get in the middle of nowhere. I'd spent 3 days already exploring the island, staying mostly on quiet trails through national parks, lava fields, and thick, jungly sections where the path narrows and feels like it's being eaten by the forest. The trail that stuck with me, this one, I found through a ranger's old online blog entry. It didn't have an official name, no signs. It was barely mentioned, just an old pig hunting path that had been converted into a kind of connector between two lesser-known lookout points. Technically public, definitely not a horseback riding trail. Narrow, with a lot of roots and soft volcanic soil that could crumble under you if you stepped wrong. That morning, I packed light, just water, some jerky, a tarp in case the weather turned. I parked off a gravel road and entered through a rusted gate that looked like it hadn't been used in years. The trail started slow, winding through lowland brush that scraped my shins, then climbing gently toward higher ground where the canopy opened up. The sun was just starting to break through. Golden beams flicked through the mist. The birds were loud in that comforting, wild way. The air smelled like damp earth and distant ocean. I was maybe 3 miles in when I started smelling something different. At first it was faint, just a sour edge to the normal forest scent. But within a few hundred yards, it grew thicker, heavier, impossible to ignore. It wasn't the smell of rot you get from dead plants or fallen logs. This was dense, wet, alive in a way that death sometimes is. I slowed down. The smell felt like it was pressing on me. Not a breeze, just a thick, unmoving presence in the air. I followed the trail around a slight bend and saw a group of national park workers standing ahead, maybe 100 feet down the trail. There were 3 of them, 2 men and 1 woman. They were all wearing white hazmat suits, the kind that zip from ankle to chin. The hoods were up, face shields on, full gloves. At first I thought maybe it was a chemical spill, pesticide or something to do with volcanic gas. But then I saw what they were standing around. It was a horse, dead, bloated, its body stretched and lifted in places that bodies aren't supposed to stretch. Its legs jutted out at strange angles, stiff and swollen. The hooves twisted slightly like they had locked up during death. The belly was massive. The hide had split in several places, exposing red-black tissue that glistened in the morning light. Its mouth was open, lips drawn back so far I could see most of the teeth. The tongue hung thick and gray over one side. The eyes were gone, maybe eaten, maybe burst. There were flies, clouds of them, not buzzing like normal. It sounded deeper, almost a hum. The air shimmered above it, heat and decay mixing. I stopped a good distance back. I didn't want to get close, didn't want to interrupt whatever was happening, but I couldn't look away either. The workers didn't react to me, didn't wave or gesture. They moved slowly, precisely. One of them was dragging a plastic tarp around the horse's rear legs. Another was holding a thick rope. The third carried a chainsaw. It started up a second later, loud, echoing through the trees. The first cut went through one of the hind legs. Took longer than I expected. The chainsaw didn't go cleanly. Caught in the swollen flesh, slipped, then redug. The worker pressed hard, steady, until the joint gave way. A splash of black-red liquid arced up onto his suit. The smell hit harder then, thicker, like hot, wet garbage left out in the sun for days. I gagged, stepped back, nearly slipped on a root. They didn't react to the mess. They just kept working. The leg came off, was wrapped in plastic, then tied with rope. They moved to the front leg next. Another slow, sticky cut. The chainsaw stopped between each one, then started again. It was the sound of meat tearing that did it for me. I turned and walked back the way I came. I didn't run. I didn't want to make noise. Something about the whole thing didn't sit right, and it wasn't just the gore. This wasn't a horse trail. Horses weren't allowed up there. The Park Service didn't offer trail rides in that section. and there were no ranches nearby. It would have taken hours to get a horse up that far, and no sane person would do it on that path. Too narrow, too unstable. No hoof prints on the trail either. It had to have been dumped. That's what stuck with me. Someone brought that horse up there after it died or near death, and left it in the middle of a hiking path that only a handful of people even knew about. They didn't just abandon it in the jungle or off the road. They left it where people walk, where people go to lose themselves in the quiet. I reached my car in less than an hour, faster than I had come in. My clothes stank, not from the corpse, but from the way the smell had settled on everything. Even the inside of my mouth tasted sour. I drank all the water in my bottle, trying to wash it away. Didn't work. That night, back at the cabin, I lay in the hammock and stared up at the stars, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. Felt like a message, or maybe not a message, more like a reminder that no matter how beautiful a place is, no matter how remote or peaceful or untouched it feels, there's always something just beneath the surface. Something human, something ugly. I never learned what really happened to the horse. I checked the park's official website for days afterward. No reports, no warnings, no mention of animal carcasses or trail closures. I even tried emailing a contact I found for the local ranger district. No reply. It was like it never happened, like they cleaned it up, buried the pieces, and erased the whole thing. But I saw it. I smelled it. I heard the saws. And I remember the way the workers moved. Quiet, practiced, emotionless, like they'd done it before. The next time I hiked, months later and on a different island, I noticed something that hadn't bothered me before. The stillness, when it's too quiet, when the birds stop, when the wind doesn't move the leaves. That's when I start to feel it again. That hum, that stink, the sound of the blade in meat. There's nothing haunted about it, nothing supernatural, but it was real. And sometimes the real things are worse. I don't usually tell this story, not because I'm scared of people thinking I'm crazy, but because the whole thing still sticks to me in ways I don't understand. I've done solo hiking and backcountry trails for years. I like the quiet, the stillness of the forest, the way your mind settles into something slower when you're far from noise. But this time was different. Something about this trail, this one part of it, has stayed inside my head like a splinter that won't come out. It happened in early October. The air was crisp but not cold, perfect hiking weather. I'd taken a few days off from work to clear my head. Nothing was wrong exactly, just that usual itch that comes after too much time indoors, staring at screens. I packed up my gear the night before, tossed everything into my old Subaru, and left before sunrise the next morning. I headed toward a lesser-known state forest about 4 hours north. It didn't get much traffic. No cell service for most of it. That's what I liked. The trailhead was nothing more than a dirt pull-off with a weathered wooden sign and a cracked map board. I should have known from the way the sign leaned to one side that this place didn't get maintained much anymore. The trail I planned to take looped about 22 miles through dense pine and maple woods, across a couple ridgelines, then back down to the car. I figured I'd take it slow, spend 2 nights out there. Just me, the wind, and whatever wildlife crossed my path. The first day was quiet. Cool air, dry leaves crunching underfoot, the occasional bird call or squirrel scurrying through brush. I didn't see anyone else, which wasn't a surprise. I made it about 9 miles in and found a flat area near a small creek to pitch my tent. Ate some jerky, stretched out, and watched the last light fade through the trees. Nothing strange that night. No weird sounds, no animals poking around. Just sleep, broken once or twice by the usual forest noises. I left camp early the next morning, boots still damp from the dew. About 3 miles ahead was the highest part of the trail, a narrow ridgeline that ran along a spine of rock for maybe a mile before dipping down into a valley. That's where it happened. That's where I found them. I was about halfway along that ridge when I noticed something out of place. Something hanging from a tree off to the left, maybe 30 feet from the trail. At first I thought it was trash, some hiker hanging up their food bag and forgetting it. But then I saw another, and another, all hanging at different heights from different branches. I stepped off the trail to get a better look. Dolls. Hundreds of them. They were hanging from a huge twisted oak that had no business being up there. The rest of the ridge was scrub pine and hard rock. But this oak stood alone, gnarled and blackened in some places like it had been struck by lightning years ago and just kept living anyway. The dolls hung from every branch like some kind of rotten fruit. Some were old porcelain, the kind with glass eyes and painted lips, their faces cracked and weather-worn. Others were plastic, modern-looking, limbs faded from sun exposure. A few were stuffed cloth, bleached white from rain and time. Every single one was posed in some twisted, sick way. One had its arms and legs tied behind its back with rusty wire, a piece of cloth stuffed in its mouth. Another had nails driven through its hands, its face burned black with what looked like old fire damage. Some had their heads wrapped in duct tape. Others were missing limbs, eyes dug out, torsos slashed open and stitched closed again with twine. And it wasn't random. It didn't feel like a kid's prank or some weird artist's installation. There was too much detail, too much care put into each one. Every doll had a kind of intention to it, like someone had spent hours thinking about exactly how to display it. I stood there too long. The wind had picked up a little, just enough to make them sway. That made it worse. The way their limbs jerked in the breeze, the way the shadows flicked across the ground. It looked like they were moving, twitching in pain. I wanted to believe it was just some hermit's twisted hobby, or an old trail marker from long ago, something the locals had forgotten. But it didn't feel like that. Felt fresh. The string and wire weren't rotted. Some of the dolls looked too clean, too recently placed. I found one near the base of the tree, half buried in leaves. Its dress was new. Not brand new, but clean. Not sun-faded or weather-beaten, like someone had brought it up there recently. The silence was wrong, too. No birds, no squirrels. Even the wind seemed to hush around that place. I backed away slowly. I didn't touch anything, didn't take photos. Something told me that was a bad idea. I got back on the trail and didn't stop moving. My heart was hammering, and I couldn't shake the image of those dolls. The way they were displayed, tortured, like someone had used them to act out scenes. I kept hiking fast, faster than I should have. I had 10 miles left to go, but I didn't feel tired, just cold inside, like something had slipped under my skin. About 2 hours later, I realized I was off trail. Not lost exactly, but wrong. The trail had narrowed into what looked more like a game path. I hadn't noticed when it happened. Maybe I missed a marker, or maybe I turned wrong at some intersection. But this wasn't the main loop. The trees were thicker, the ground softer. I kept moving forward, hoping it would reconnect, but I wasn't sure anymore. Then I saw another one, a doll, hanging from a birch branch. This one was different, small, a toddler's doll with plastic hair and a pink dress. It had been nailed to the branch. One nail through the stomach, one through each hand. Eyes missing, lips painted over with red marker way too thick. I turned around and started back the way I came. Then I saw another, behind me, tied to a low tree, dangling eye level, almost like it had been waiting for me to see it. It hadn't been there before, or maybe I missed it, but that didn't feel right. I started walking faster, then running. My pack thumped against my back with every step. I just wanted to get back to the real trail, to anything familiar. The woods started to feel thicker. The light changed, duller, like something was pressing the sun down behind a screen of clouds, even though I hadn't seen clouds all day. I finally hit a stretch I recognized. The ridge was visible through the trees. I'd looped somehow, backtracked maybe, but now I was sure I was close to the main trail again. I paused to breathe and let my pulse settle. I told myself I was just spooked, just tired and letting my imagination run. But the dolls were still there, more of them. Not as many as the oak tree, just a few scattered, hung low, close to eye level, like markers. I don't know how long it took, but I finally made it to the bottom of the ridge and found the real trail again. I almost cried when I saw the old wooden marker nailed to a tree. I kept going, didn't stop for water, didn't eat. I just wanted to be back at my car. When I reached the dirt pull-off, the sun was already low. My car was there, untouched. I threw my gear in the back and drove without checking anything. Didn't take off my boots. Didn't eat until hours later when I stopped at a gas station. I didn't tell anyone about it. Not then. Not even now, not really. I wrote down what I saw, made a note of the location. I thought about calling the rangers, but what would I say? That someone was hanging dolls in tortured poses on a tree in the middle of nowhere? That I got lost and saw more of them and thought maybe someone was watching me? They'd laugh or they'd send someone out, find nothing, and I'd be the weirdo who cried haunted tree. But it wasn't ghosts. It wasn't anything supernatural. That's what makes it worse. Someone did that. Someone climbed that ridge with bags full of dolls and wire and nails and spent hours, maybe days, setting it all up, and they're still out there, maybe living nearby, maybe watching hikers like me, waiting to see who stops, who notices, who doesn't come back. Sometimes I wonder if I was meant to see it, if the trail I took wasn't a mistake at all. It's been 2 years, and I haven't gone hiking alone since. I still camp. I still walk in the woods sometimes, but never solo, and never anywhere near that ridge. I could take you there. I remember exactly where it was, but I won't. You don't want to see it. Not really, because once you do, you'll start to notice dolls in strange places. On roadsides, in empty lots, hanging from fences, and you'll wonder if they're watching you, just like I still do. I used to live near a lake, one of those small, peaceful ones that sits just outside town limits, quiet enough to forget the noise of daily life, but close enough to hit after work or early in the morning. It wasn't a destination kind of place. No beach, no boat ramps, no concession stands. Just a wide ring of trees, a narrow dirt trail that circled the water, and maybe 1 or 2 benches at the halfway mark. If you weren't from the area, you'd never find it, and if you did, you probably wouldn't come back. It was calm and unremarkable. I liked that about it. I used to walk that lake trail all the time. I knew every bend, every tree root, every place where the trail got too muddy after a storm. I could walk it without thinking. Sometimes I did. I put in headphones and let my mind go while my feet took over. It was a loop, maybe just under 2 miles all the way around, with the lake always visible through the trees on one side, and the woods closing in close on the other. This one day I remember very clearly. It was maybe early spring. The weather had finally warmed up enough to feel good in a t-shirt. Blue sky, light breeze, everything still damp from rain a few days before. I had the day off work and wanted to be outside. Stretch my legs a little, just clear my head. I parked at the gravel turnout near the entrance and started off around the lake. It was a weekday early afternoon. Nobody was around. That was normal. Weekends saw a few dog walkers, maybe the occasional couple or jogger. But this time of day, midweek, it was almost always just me. I liked that about it too. There's something comforting about being in a familiar place alone, where nature is quiet and you don't have to make small talk with strangers. That's how I felt starting out that day. Comforted, like I was stepping into a space that belonged to me in a small way. The trail starts off wide, almost like an old road, before narrowing into more of a footpath as you move deeper in. You pass a small wooden sign at the start, just the name of the lake, faded and worn, and then you're under the trees. The air feels cooler there, even in warm weather, and you can always hear the birds moving around in the branches above. I was about 10 minutes in. The lake curved gently off to my right, the water still and dark, reflecting the trees like a mirror. I could see a few turtles sunning themselves on a log near the bank. Everything felt still, calm. But then I got that feeling. You know the one I mean, like someone is behind you. It comes out of nowhere, with no noise or sound, just a sudden weight between your shoulder blades. I didn't hear footsteps. I didn't feel a breeze, but something in me shifted. I can't explain it better than that. I didn't panic, didn't even turn around right away. I just slowed a little, kept walking, but my ears started listening harder. My body went alert. Then I turned. About 30 feet back down the trail, there was a man walking in my direction. He wasn't just strolling. He was walking fast. Not a jog, not quite a power walk either, but with clear purpose. His arms moved with momentum. His head was up, and he was looking right at me, Not at the lake, not at the trail. I only had a second or two to take that in. Just enough time to feel my chest tighten, to feel something ice-cold settle in my stomach. Then he stopped, still staring. Then, without slowing down first, he turned sharply on his heel and walked back the other way. Same pace, same posture, just gone. Like he'd hit an invisible wall and changed his mind. I stood there frozen for a long time, long enough to hear the blood rushing in my ears. The hair on the back of my neck was up. My hands were suddenly damp. I wasn't out of breath, but I was full of adrenaline, the kind that doesn't come from thinking. It comes from your body knowing something you don't. I scanned the trail behind him, but didn't see anyone else. No other hikers. No sounds but the rustle of wind in the branches and the soft lap of water against the shore. I couldn't shake the feeling. Not just that I'd seen someone weird, but that I'd interrupted something. That me turning around had broken a moment I wasn't supposed to see. And more than that, it felt like I'd narrowly avoided something. That he had a plan, and that plan only changed because I looked at him first. There was nothing stopping me from continuing the hike. It was a loop after all. He was walking the other direction. I could have just kept going and passed him somewhere later, or finished out the trail. But I didn't. I stepped off the trail into a small clearing just off the path, hidden enough that I could crouch low and still see the trail, but no one on it could see me easily. I waited, not long at first. 5 minutes, 10. I thought maybe I was just rattled, that I was overreacting. But then 15 minutes passed, then 20, still nothing. Then I heard footsteps again, not far behind, crunching leaves, steady, slow. I stayed completely still. The man came back. He wasn't walking with the same fast pace anymore. This time he was slow, paused often. His head turned as he walked, like he was scanning the woods, like he was looking for something, like he was looking for me. I can't describe the feeling I had. It wasn't fear the way a horror movie makes you afraid. It was deeper than that, more primal. My body wanted to run, but some older part of me knew better, that running would make noise, that noise would give me away. So I stayed crouched. I didn't breathe. I watched through a thin screen of bushes as he walked by, eyes sweeping the tree-line, jaw clenched, hands fidgeting at his sides like he couldn't decide what to do with them. He didn't call out. He didn't look relaxed. His whole body looked tense. He moved like someone hunting, slow and methodical. He passed by, disappeared around the curve of the trail. I waited another 5 minutes, 10. Still nothing. Then I stood slowly, heart pounding. I checked behind me, ahead of me, across the lake. Still alone. No noise. I walked quickly but quietly back to the entrance. Didn't run, didn't stop. Just moved. It felt like it took forever, but in reality, it was maybe 7 or 8 minutes. When I got to the gravel parking area, it was still empty. My car sat alone under the trees. I got in, locked the doors, and sat there for a few minutes just breathing. Then I drove home. I didn't tell anyone about it for a while. Not right away. I wasn't even sure what to say. It didn't feel like something that could be explained well. Nothing had technically happened. I wasn't attacked. I wasn't followed all the way to my car. I wasn't threatened. But deep down, I knew. I knew I'd almost been in a situation that would have changed everything. I never saw the man's face clearly. I remember he was maybe late 30s, maybe early 40s. Average height, jeans and a hoodie. Nothing that stood out. No backpack, no dog, no water bottle. Just a guy walking fast in the middle of the woods in the middle of the week, who turned back the moment I turned around, and came back again a few minutes later, scanning the woods like he was looking for something that slipped away. I haven't hiked that trail again since. It's been years now. I live in a different place. I still go hiking sometimes, but I don't go alone as much. And when I do, I pay attention. I don't use headphones. I check behind me more often than I used to. I take mental notes of who I pass on the trail. That experience changed something in me. Not because something happened, but because something almost did. I think about it more than I should. That if I hadn't turned around when I did, if I just kept walking, headphones in, mind drifting, I might not have noticed him at all until he was too close. And I don't know what he would have done if I hadn't turned. But every part of me says I didn't imagine that danger. That moment, Him locking eyes with me, then turning like he'd been caught. It wasn't just weird, it was real. Real enough that my body still remembers what it felt like to hide in the brush and hear someone searching for me. Whatever his reason for being there, it wasn't good. I trust that feeling. I trusted it then, and I trust it now. And sometimes I still wonder how close I really came.